So I am Craig Metrick, principal with Mercer, and I run the responsible investment business in the U.S. So we are a largely institutional investment consultant, and our team helps clients integrate environmental, social, and governance issues into their investment programs. I'm also on the board of the U.S. Forum for Sustainable and Responsible Investment. I would encourage you who are interested in these issues to visit their website and consider joining at an event or as a member. The website is socialinvest.org, and we have put out guides on how to address these issues in your portfolios, whether you're an institutional or retail investor. The other thing I wanted to mention is that I do always like to start off with a joke. I just wanted you to know that. Now the best joke I can come up with is, so last week I was on a panel on ESG, environmental, social, and governance issues and fiduciary duty, and the panel was me and 4 guys named Steve. That's the punchline. That's it. That's all there was. I want to take you through kind of a little mini history of my career at Mercer, not as a pitch, but because I think it's instructive as to how fiduciaries, including investment managers and including consultants like us, and including asset owners like pension plans and endowments and foundations are looking at these issues. So I'm going to start in the middle of my slide. So this is a different version of a slide that Paul showed earlier. In 2008, Mercer committed to rate every investment strategy that we cover due diligence on and recommend or not to clients. We committed to rate them on how they're incorporating environmental, social, and governance factors from an investment perspective. So it's not fossil fuel free and climate change only. We're looking at environmental, social, and governance factors, and not from an ethical or moral perspective, but from how do the managers think they're adding value to their portfolio through consideration of these issues. And when we first started having these conversations in 2008, we actually started having them a little earlier than that. The conversations with the manager would go something like this. We'd ask, do you think environmental, social, and governance issues are material? And if so, how are you integrating that into your portfolio and investment decision-making processes? And their answers would be something like, what? Fast forward to, say, 2010. The conversations are getting a lot easier with managers. They have a story to tell. It's not always the story we may all want to hear. They may say, well, we've looked at it. We don't think there's any value there, so we don't consider it. But more and more are saying, yeah, we have examples, maybe not every issue, maybe not every portfolio, but we have examples where these issues are influencing our portfolio decisions. So the fact that the conversations are getting easier is actually making our job harder to tell the managers that are doing this the best and the ones not so much. But it means that they're more willing to listen. Fast forward to last year, even though that's not really fast forwarding because we're past last year, but fast forward from 2010 to last year, there was an event in New York called ESG in RFPs. And it was an event that had formerly been held in London, put on by a group called Responsible Investor. They did it in the US for the first time. And what it is it's mainly large institutional investment managers curious about how to answer the questions they're seeing in RFPs from their clients about sustainability and climate change and environmental, social, and governance factors. So last year, I spoke. This year, Mercer's U.S. head of investments, who's a much higher pay grade than I am, is speaking. Has probably already spoke, actually. So I think there's evidence there that outside of this room, the conversations probably aren't the level that we want them at yet, but they're starting to move. The next bit of history, in 2010, and this goes back to the shout out that Ken Laughlin gave me earlier. In 2010, we did a study with 14 very large investors around the world: CalPERS, CalSTRS, Norway, Singapore, trillions in assets. And what we were looking at was how the impacts of climate change risk on strategic asset allocation, the potential risk. And we did a few things. The participants of the study decided on a 20-year time frame. So we were looking 2010 to 2030. We identified 4 different scenarios. So we used an economics consulting firm in the Grantham Institute to look at economic scenarios, impacts, and climate change modeling that had already been done on physical impacts and other factors. So we looked at 4 scenarios from the day we start the study, we do everything we can to mitigate and stop climate change, to we do nothing or less than nothing. And then there were a couple of scenarios in between. We then, and this is the largest part of the work that Mercer did, was we developed 3 different climate change risk factors. I'm trying to do this without dropping the remote control. One was technology, one was physical impacts, and the other was policy. So technology is not a cost, even though if you can see really closely, it says that at the top there. It's the investment opportunity. And physical impacts is the damage that you can measure economically from climate change. And then policy is the cost to investors and businesses of policy that is enacted too late or too aggressively. And so together we built these factors into a multi-factor risk framework that Mercer was already using. So we have liquidity risk premium, equity premium, credit premium in there, and we put in these factors as well. And what we found was these are numbers that are showing the kind of optimal scenario to get the biggest number. So I'll say that up front. The scenario where in 2010 we started doing everything we can to stop climate change and mitigate emissions and invest in new technologies, about a $5 trillion opportunity over the 20 years. So right now, because we didn't do that in 2010, we, the investors, are missing out on a lot of that opportunity. There are certainly pockets and there are opportunities out there, but there could be more. Accumulated costs of the physical impacts, we actually found that in the 20-year time horizon, that wasn't the biggest risk factor. In fact, of the 3, it's potentially the cheapest, although we know that certain factors like human impacts in emerging markets and migration of food growing and things like that, human migrations were undercalculated just because the data isn't available. But still, $4 trillion. And the increase of carbon emissions due to climate change policy measures, the largest number. So $8 trillion, and this is the scenario I spoke at before. Where the worst scenario is that we do nothing until it's too late, and then we have to do too much. And no one knows it's coming, no one can prepare for it. It costs investors money, it costs companies money. So the recommendations from that study, you may be able to extrapolate, but I'll go through those quickly. One is engagement. So if policy is potentially the biggest cost, investors have an interest in making sure that policy is done in a constructive way and sooner rather than later. The other thing we found in mapping these risk factors and scenarios to asset classes is that a portfolio with more climate-sensitive assets could act as a hedge under certain scenarios. So if there's a scenario where we decide to do anything, to an extent, the more assets you have in longer-term investments, real assets, that could benefit your portfolio. Out of that, they didn't like my joke. So out of that project, we have started to try to enable clients to act on this information. So we now bundle our best ideas across private markets, across private equity and infrastructure and real assets for investors to invest in sustainability themed assets in a single solution. We believe there's opportunity out there. We'll get back to that later. Let's see, so last year in July, so this is moving on to another piece of history, My associate and I, Catherine, and Catherine, we hired her right out of Bard College about 3 years ago. She was active in the SRI group in the college. We started to see a lot more activity on the part of groups like the Responsible Endowments Coalition and others, and starting to get questions from our clients about this. So we wrote an article saying that student campaigns were getting more sophisticated. They were looking at a broader range of issues, and clients, higher education endowments, ought to prepare to get these questions from students. A week later, Bill McKibben's article was published in Rolling Stone, and I had the opportunity for thanking him for making us look so smart, and he was very pleased to do that, I'm sure. The next thing, so moving towards the end here, just recently, in September, we did a quick survey of our nonprofit clients. So this isn't just higher ed endowments, but it's a large proportion of higher education endowments, healthcare institutions, nonprofits, and we asked them really 3 questions. Have you heard about the campaign, the fossil fuel free campaign? Are you discussing it? And what are you doing, if anything, about it? So there's good news and maybe some challenging news here. 35% of the clients that responded said they've heard about it. So again, this isn't just higher education endowments. If it was, maybe it would be higher. There are some folks still who haven't heard of it. 20% have discussed it or will discuss it. The other 80%, the 80% of the 20% that have discussed it are still discussing it or are going to take some action or have taken some action. So the 80% is potentially an encouraging number, but this is a year ago that the article came out, and we have clients that still want to discuss it, are taking it seriously, but it has to get on the meeting agenda. The committee meets quarterly, and things take time. So that's just something to keep in mind. On the right are the top actions taken by those who responded and said they were taking some action. So let's just go through these a little bit. I still have a few minutes? Couple minutes. All right. So reviewing fossil fuel exposure. Tom, I think, mentioned 3 to 4%. We found clients on average have a little higher than that, 5 to 8%. But sometimes that's less than the index weight, which is strange. But that's true. And reviewing fossil fuel exposure, if you're going to deal with this issue, it's a necessary step, but we kind of know what the answers are. Positive investments. There's some real pain out there from investors that got into clean energy early. In the early mid-2000s. A lot of those investments didn't do very well, but as we've heard all day, the opportunity set is a lot greater now. You've had strategies and managers fail, which is bad, but on the right side, the strong survive, and you have a higher quality, we believe, opportunity set to choose from now, as well as a broader opportunity set in terms of sectors and potential investments. Reviewing existing managers. That also, we think is a worthwhile exercise. We have a way to do that, as do others in the room. It's important to ask those questions, and we think it makes a big impact, even if you're a small investor, to say, listen, this is of interest to me in my constituency. You should take it seriously, and I can point to these people who are also taking it seriously. Developing a policy isn't shaded there, but I want to bring it up because it's concerning me a little bit, because I've heard a couple of stories of endowments, institutional investors that are coming up with policies that say we will consider sustainability in our endowment when it's material. And we don't think that's a bad idea. We do think this divestment campaign is a little different than some others because we believe there is a risk out there that can't be measured. But to have a policy that says you're going to consider these factors when they're material and then not have a process for these issues being raised or to figure out whether they're material or not, we think that's dangerous and potentially more dangerous than doing nothing. So we're counseling our clients that, yes, we think a policy is a good idea because it helps you avoid the concern about the slippery slope where it's fossil fuel divestment today and big bank divestment tomorrow and fast food companies the day after and big banks after that. So a policy is a good thing, but there ought to be something behind it. So real quick, let's jump to the bottom. Unfortunately, maybe for this crowd, divesting is down there at the bottom. And there are reasons, I think, why that may be, but there are also answers to that. So one is evidence, and we've been talking about evidence all day. There's evidence at the company level that these issues matter. There's evidence at the portfolio level that these strategies may do well. What other levels are there? There's our evidence that we did at the strategic asset allocation level. So nowadays, when someone comes to me and says, I want to see evidence, I say, tell me what evidence will make the difference, and we'll do it. Or we'll, maybe it won't work out, but we'll do it, and we'll see if it works. I think there's a lot of evidence out there, so either people aren't believing it, or they're not seeing it, or there's something else. The slippery slope is a legitimate issue. If you talk to people at endowments, many of them have been around for South Africa divestment, Sudan divestment, guns, tobacco. They're worried if we divest from one, we're going to be asked to divest from a whole host of things, and eventually we'll have nothing to divest in. So I think, or nothing to invest in. So I think the alternatives are important to discuss for folks where that's a concern. Lastly, costs and structures. It's hard to divest for institutions that are in commingled funds that have a lot of alternative investments. So you can divest from the carbon tracker list, but what about private equity? What about MLPs? There's more fossil fuels in the portfolio. But I think also today we've heard that there's a lot more tools to assess the risk throughout the portfolio. There's a lot more strategies to seek positive investments. There's a lot more engagement opportunities through series and INCR and